You see, the curious thing about the mind is that it loves to play games with itself. It creates problems, then forgets it was the one who invented them in the first place. It builds prisons and then sits inside them, rattling the bars, asking why life is so confined. And yet, all along, the door is not even locked. We are caught in these little tricks of thought. Traps, really. They whisper to us that peace is somewhere else, just around the corner, always beyond the present moment. And so we run endlessly after what we already have. Like a dog chasing its tail, we mistake movement for progress and suffering for meaning. But what if I told you that the very effort to escape is the thing that keeps us bound, that the striving for peace is the surest way never to find it? These are the mind's traps, hidden in plain sight, and unless you see them for what they are, you'll keep wandering in circles, missing the stillness that was here from the very beginning. The strange thing about human beings is that we are forever trying to control what cannot be controlled and resisting what cannot be resisted. The mind, clever as it is, believes that if it can just arrange everything in neat little compartments, if it can just push the right buttons and pull the right levers, then life will behave the way it should. It is as though we imagine existence is a machine, and that by studying the manual long enough, we will learn exactly how to operate it without error. But existence is not a machine. It is not a fixed thing that obeys our calculations. It is more like the ocean, wild, alive, constantly shifting, moving in patterns that cannot be contained within the limits of thought. And yet we pretend that our maps are the territory, that our schedules are time itself, that our expectations will somehow bend reality into obedience. And when it doesn't, we grow frustrated, anxious, resentful, as though life has betrayed us. You can see this in every corner of daily experience. Someone sits in traffic, gripping the wheel, cursing the slow cars ahead. In that moment, they are attempting to control the uncontrollable. The traffic is what it is. The flow has its own rhythm, and no amount of wishing or complaining will make it move faster. But the mind hates this. It wants to feel like the master of circumstances, so it produces agitation, as if through anger or tension the situation might change. Yet the only thing that changes is the person's own state of being. They have handed over their peace of mind to an illusion, the illusion that by resisting what already is, they might somehow alter it. We carry this illusion of control into every dimension of our lives. We imagine that by thinking long enough, by planning carefully enough, we can secure the future against all uncertainty. We draw up blueprints for happiness and strategies for success, and then when reality unfolds differently, as it always does, we suffer twice. Once from the event itself, and once from the collapse of the story we had built around it. And the suffering from the collapse is often the greater of the two. For the truth is, uncertainty is the very nature of life. It is not a flaw in the system, it is the system. Every breath, every step, every moment is infused with the unknown, and no amount of effort will erase that. Think of how exhausting it is to live under the illusion of control. A person wakes in the morning and already the mind is racing, anticipating what could go wrong, rehearsing conversations, imagining disasters. They are trying to control reality before it has even arrived. Then they move through the day in a constant state of adjustment and correction, comparing what is happening with what they believe should be happening and feeling the friction between the two. By the end of the day, they are drained, but not from the living itself, rather from the endless struggle to make life match their imagination. And here lies the great irony: the harder we cling to control, the more chaotic our experience becomes. There is a deep insecurity at the root of this trap. To admit that we are not in control feels terrifying. The mind whispers that if we let go, everything will fall apart, that if we do not hold tight to the reins, the horse will run wild. But watch closely. Has life not been moving long before you arrived? The earth spins without your effort. The seasons turn without your command. Your heart beats without your instruction. The great processes of existence are unfolding in their own mysterious rhythm, and it is only the ego that believes it stands at the center, orchestrating the whole thing. When you begin to see this clearly, a curious sense of relief arises. You discover that you were never the one holding the universe together in the first place. The illusion of control creates conflict not only with the external world but also within ourselves. How many people torture themselves with the thought, I must not feel this, I must not think this, I must not be this way. The mind sets itself against its own movements, as if thoughts and feelings were misbehaving pets that could be trained with enough discipline. But thought arises on its own, feeling moves on its own. They are part of the living current, not possessions to be controlled. In trying to dominate the inner world, we create division: the controller versus the controlled, the thinker versus the thought. And this division is endless, because the controller is nothing but another thought pretending to be in charge. Observe the play of this illusion in relationships. One person tries to control another's behavior, their affections, their choices, all in the name of love or security. But the more one tightens the grip, the more the other struggles to break free. What is meant to preserve the bond instead strangles it. Or consider the way people try to control their image, carefully curating how others perceive them, guarding against every possible criticism. This is a prison. For now, every word and action must be weighed against the imaginary judgment of the crowd. Life becomes performance rather than living, anxiety rather than presence. The wisdom traditions have always whispered the same truth, that freedom comes not from control, but from seeing through the illusion of control. When you understand that life cannot be captured in the net of thought, you stop struggling to do so. You discover that reality unfolds of its own accord, and that your role is not to command the river, but to move with it. This does not mean passivity or indifference. It means a deeper form of intelligence, one that responds to life as it is rather than as you wish it to be. Like a dancer moving with music, you are not controlling the song, but neither are you being dragged by it. You are participating in harmony with it, allowing the rhythm to carry you while expressing yourself freely within it. When we cling to control, we make ourselves rigid, and rigidity is fragile. The tree that will not bend with the wind is the one that breaks in the storm, but the tree that yields, that sways, remains standing. The same is true of us. To live as though everything must fit into our plan is to invite constant frustration, because life is not obligated to obey our designs. To live in awareness of uncertainty, however, is to become supple, to move gracefully with change, to discover a resilience that control could never provide. Children often show us what we have forgotten. Watch how they play. They are not trying to control the game. They are absorbed in it, flowing from one moment to the next. If the rules change, they adapt. If the toy breaks, they invent a new story. There is no desperate clinging to how things should be, only an openness to what is. Yet as adults, we lose this playfulness. We become serious, fixated on our scripts and expectations, measuring every moment against an imagined ideal. And in this seriousness, we lose the very vitality we are trying to preserve. The illusion of control is seductive because it offers comfort. It gives the mind the feeling that it knows, that it is safe, that tomorrow can be secured by today's efforts. But deep down, we know this is not true. We know that plans unravel, that bodies age, that fortunes shift, that death comes without appointment. To live pretending otherwise is to build a house on sand. The moment reality shakes, the whole structure collapses, leaving us bewildered. But when we begin from the recognition that control is illusory, we are not shaken in the same way. We have not bet our peace on the false promise that life will obey us. This is not an argument against action. It is not to say that one should never plan, never prepare, never act responsibly. Of course we do these things, but with the understanding that they are not guarantees, only gestures. A sailor sets his sails according to the wind, but he does not command the wind. A gardener plants seeds and waters them, but he does not order the sun to shine. Action is necessary, but control is imaginary. When you act from this awareness, your effort becomes lighter, freer, without the heaviness of attachment. You do what you can and you let life do the rest. So much of our anxiety is born from the gap between our desire to control and the reality of uncertainty. If you can see this gap clearly, you begin to loosen. You begin to notice how often the tension in your body, the worry in your mind is tied to something beyond your power. You begin to release the grip, slowly at first, cautiously, like someone learning to float in water. And then, as trust grows, you find that the water holds you up without your struggle. Life carries you not because you have mastered it, but because you have stopped fighting it. The mind has a peculiar way of tricking us. It whispers that happiness, peace, fulfillment are things to be found just beyond the horizon. Always one step ahead, never quite here. It says, when you achieve this, when you arrive there, when you fix that, then you will finally rest. And so we chase tirelessly, endlessly, like a donkey following the carrot dangling just out of reach. This is the trap of seeking. It is not that seeking in itself is wrong. Curiosity and exploration are natural expressions of life. But when the mind convinces you that peace lies somewhere else, outside of the present, you are caught in a game that can never be won. Consider how most of us live. We set goals, we build dreams, we imagine that the future holds the answer. A young person thinks, if I can only get into the right school, then I will be secure. They enter the school and immediately the mind says, if I can only graduate, then I'll be free. Graduation arrives and the mind shifts again. If I get the right job, the right partner, the right house, then life will be complete. And on it goes, the horizon receding with every step forward. The prize is always just beyond the grasp, because the mind does not know how to rest in what is here. It survives on motion, on the promise of more, on the endless search for what it already has but does not recognize. Seeking keeps us suspended in time, always leaning forward, rarely sinking into the present moment. The mind paints images of a perfect future and convinces us that today is merely a stepping stone, something to be endured rather than lived. But life is never in the future. It is always now. Tomorrow never arrives as tomorrow, it arrives as today. Yet when it does, we are too busy rushing toward the next thing to notice. And so we pass through life like someone rushing through a museum, glancing briefly at the art without ever pausing to see its depth. we miss the very beauty we were seeking. Look carefully, and you'll see how the trap of seeking creeps into even the most subtle corners of the mind. A person begins meditation, hoping to find peace, and immediately the mind says, "Am I peaceful yet? Am I doing this right? When will the calm arrive?" But in this striving, the very nature of meditation is lost, because the act of seeking peace is the surest way to miss it. Peace arises when seeking subsides, when there is no demand for the moment to be different. Similarly, in relationships, people chase the perfect partner, imagining that love will complete them. But the chasing itself is the obstacle, because love is not discovered in the pursuit of perfection, it blooms in the acceptance of imperfection. The trap of seeking is fueled by dissatisfaction. The mind convinces us that something is missing, that what we are and what we have is not enough. It thrives on the sense of lack, because as long as we feel incomplete, we will keep searching, and as long as we are searching, the mind remains in control. This sense of lack becomes the background hum of our existence, pushing us forward without pause. Yet the strange paradox is that everything we seek, peace, happiness, freedom, is already woven into the fabric of the present moment. It is not that these things are hidden. It is that our gaze is fixed elsewhere. Seeking also has a way of fragmenting the self. When we are constantly chasing after something out there, we overlook what is alive in here. We treat ourselves as projects to be improved, always measuring who we are against who we think we should be. The mind says, "I will love myself when I am more successful, when I look better, when others approve of me." In this way, self-acceptance is postponed indefinitely. But acceptance is not a reward for self-improvement. It is the soil from which genuine growth emerges. By seeking to become, we overlook the truth of being. The culture we live in reinforces this trap. From every direction, advertisements shout that happiness is one purchase away, one achievement away, one upgrade away. We are told that life will be better with the new car, the new phone, the new body, the new status. But the cycle never ends, because as soon as one desire is fulfilled, another arises in its place. And so the consumer is kept on the treadmill, running furiously yet remaining in the same place. The economy thrives on this, but the spirit withers. For the soul does not hunger for more things. It hungers for presence, for authenticity, for connection to the living moment. There is nothing wrong with goals or aspirations. The problem arises when we believe that peace is waiting at the finish line. Goals can guide our actions, but they cannot deliver what the mind promises. If you climb a mountain believing that happiness is waiting at the summit, you will be disappointed, because happiness is not at the top any more than it is at the bottom. It is in the walking itself, in the wind on your face, in the rhythm of your steps. The summit is only a brief moment, soon gone, and if you have not learned to be present along the way, you will not know how to be present when you arrive. There is a story of a man who spent his whole life chasing treasure. He traveled far and wide, through deserts and forests, through storms and hardship, always searching for the chest of gold that would finally make him complete. At the end of his life, weary and disappointed, he returned home. There, beneath the floorboards of his very own house, was the treasure he had sought all along. The seeking had blinded him to what was closest. And so it is with us. We seek peace out in the world, in achievements, possessions, identities, but the peace we seek is always here, under the floorboards of the present moment, waiting to be uncovered. Notice how seeking creates a restless energy in the body. Even when sitting still, the mind fidgets, the heart leans forward, the body vibrates with anticipation. It is as though we are allergic to stillness, afraid that if we stop moving, we will miss out on something. Yet it is only in stillness that the richness of life reveals itself. A flower is not rushing to bloom. The ocean is not hurrying its waves. The stars are not striving to shine. They simply are, and in their being they express a beauty that no striving could produce. This trap is subtle because it wears the disguise of progress. It tells us that we are growing, advancing, becoming better. But growth does not mean constantly reaching for the next branch. It means sinking roots deeply into the soil of now. Becoming better is not about rejecting who we are, but about unfolding naturally from within who we already are. The greatest transformations do not come from restless seeking, but from deep presence. The mind's addiction to seeking often shows itself in spiritual circles as well. People go from teacher to teacher, practice to practice, book to book, always searching for the ultimate answer. But the very hunger that drives the search blinds them to the truth each moment is offering. The words of the sages point not to some distant future, but to the here and now. Yet the seeker takes the finger pointing to the moon and builds a religion around the finger, forgetting to look at the moon itself. This is the tragedy of seeking. It keeps the goal just out of reach forever, postponing the realization that it was never separate in the first place. To see the trap of seeking clearly is to experience a profound shift. You begin to notice the impulse to run after the next thing, and instead of obeying it, you pause. You feel the breath, the ground beneath your feet, the aliveness of the present, and in that pause, a surprising thing happens. The very peace you were chasing begins to emerge, not as a prize at the end of effort, but as the quiet background that was there all along. The seeking falls away, and in its absence, what remains is enough. There is a kind of humor in all this. We are like people searching for our glasses while they are sitting on our nose, or looking everywhere for our keys while holding them in our hand. The peace we seek is not hidden, it is simply overlooked, because the mind is so busy scanning the horizon that it fails to see what is right here. And when at last the seeking stops, when the restless grasping relaxes, we laugh, because we realize it was always this simple. The mind has a peculiar fascination with names, with labels, with the constant effort to carve reality into neat categories that it can hold on to. From the earliest days, we are told who we are. We are given a name, a family, a culture, a nationality, a religion, a set of expectations that slowly harden into identity. And without noticing, we begin to wear these labels as though they were our very skin. We say, I am this, or I am that, and we forget that these words are only convenient markers, not the vast living mystery of what we are. The trap of identity is one of the subtlest and most suffocating prisons of the mind, because it convinces us that we are something small, fixed, and separate, when in truth we are immeasurable, flowing, and inseparable from the whole of existence. When you look deeply, you realize that identity is a game of limitation. The child who once moved freely through the world, curious and unburdened, is slowly conditioned to believe, I am this kind of person and not that kind of person. I belong here, not there. I should think these thoughts and avoid those thoughts. And with each layer of conditioning, the vast openness of being is narrowed into a story. The story may bring comfort because it gives us the illusion of stability, but at the same time it becomes a cage. To identify with the mask is to forget the face beneath it. To mistake the costume for the actor is to live in a play without ever remembering that the stage itself is infinite. We often think that identity is necessary for security, that without it we would drift aimlessly, but the opposite is true. The more tightly we cling to identity, the more fragile we become, because anything that threatens the label feels like a threat to life itself. If a person defines themselves by their career, then the loss of that career feels like death. If they define themselves by their reputation, then a single criticism shatters their sense of worth. If they define themselves by their beliefs, then any challenge to those beliefs feels like an attack. The stronger the identity, the more vulnerable we are, because reality is always shifting and the labels can never capture its fluidity. Think about how much conflict in the world is born from the identity game. Nations clash because they cling to the stories of oohs and them. Religions divide because each insists on being the only correct name for the nameless. Individuals argue and fight because they are defending not their actual being, but the image of themselves that they carry in the mind. Wars are fought not over truth, but over the attachment to identity. And all the while, the living reality that transcends all names continues quietly, unnoticed, like the silence beneath the noise. In personal life, the identity trap creates endless suffering. Someone says, I am a failure, and so every experience is filtered through that label. They cannot see the moments of success, the instances of creativity, because the identity of failure blinds them to anything that does not fit the story. Another person says, I am strong, I must never be weak, and so they hide their vulnerability, suppress their tears, and live in constant fear of being exposed. The mask becomes heavy, but they cannot take it off because they believe the mask is who they are, and so they live not as a free being, but as a performance of an idea. Identity is a form of clinging, and clinging always produces tension. To say, I am this, is to grasp at a piece of the whole and insist that it defines the entirety. But the whole cannot be grasped, and the piece is never the full truth. The river cannot be captured in a single drop, yet we try, and then we suffer when the drop evaporates. To see through identity is to remember that you are not the drop alone. You are the entire movement of the river, appearing for a moment as this form, then flowing into another. The paradox is that the self we cling to does not even exist in the way we imagine. Look for it carefully. Where is the I that you defend so fiercely? It is not in the body, for the body is constantly changing, cells dying and renewing, molecules exchanging with the environment. It is not in the mind, for thoughts arise and pass without ownership, feelings surge and fade like weather patterns. It is not in memory, for memory itself is unreliable, constantly reconstructed in the act of remembering. The self is a process, not a thing. It is like a whirlpool in the river, distinct in appearance, but inseparable from the water. To say this whirlpool is me, and it must remain forever unchanged, is to misunderstand the nature of the flow. And yet we cling because identity gives the illusion of permanence in a world of flux. We cling because it feels frightening to admit that we are not fixed, that we are not separate, that we are not the little image in the mind. But the freedom that comes from releasing this clinging is profound. When you see that you are not bound by a single identity, you become fluid, able to meet each moment freshly, without the weight of the past. You can laugh at yourself, shift your roles, adapt, dance with life rather than fight against it. Notice how children can become pirates, astronauts, doctors, superheroes, all in the space of an afternoon. They are not yet trapped in the seriousness of identity, so they play. And in their playfulness, they show a wisdom that adults have forgotten. That identity is not fixed. It is a costume that can be worn and removed. The tragedy of adulthood is that we forget the game and begin to mistake the costume for our skin. We imprison ourselves in the very labels that once were meant to be playful. In spiritual traditions, teachers often point directly at this trap. They say, "You are not the body, you are not the mind, you are not your thoughts, you are not your name." Not because the body and mind do not exist, but because they are not the totality of you. You are the space in which these things appear. You are the awareness in which identity rises and falls, just as waves rise and fall on the ocean. To identify with the wave is to be tossed about endlessly, but to recognize yourself as the ocean is to find the stillness that contains all motion. The fear of losing identity is rooted in the fear of nothingness. The mind thinks, if I let go of who I think I am, I will disappear. But the opposite is true. When you let go of the false, the limited, the borrowed, you do not disappear, you expand. You discover that the self is not confined to the little box of identity, but is vast, open, inseparable from everything. The boundaries dissolve, and what remains is not emptiness in the negative sense, but spaciousness, fullness, aliveness without center or edge. The identity game is also the source of much comparison. When you believe you are a separate self defined by achievements, possessions, or appearances, then you must constantly measure yourself against others. Am I better, worse, ahead, behind? And this measuring creates endless anxiety, because there will always be someone higher or lower, richer or poorer, stronger or weaker. The game has no end. But when you see that identity is a construct, comparison loses its grip. You no longer need to be better than another, because you see that there is no separate you to defend in the first place. To live beyond identity is not to erase individuality. It is not about becoming a blank slate. Rather, it is to play with individuality lightly, knowing it is not ultimate. You can have a name, a role, a personality, but you do not mistake it for the essence of your being. Just as an actor can fully embody a character on stage while knowing they are not confined to that role, you too can live your roles with freedom. You can be a parent, a worker, a friend, without being imprisoned by those labels. You wear them when needed and set them aside when not. The beauty of seeing through identity is that it restores a sense of unity with the whole. If you are not the separate label, then what are you? You are life itself, expressing as this particular form for a while. The tree does not cling to the identity of being a sapling, nor resist becoming an old tree. It simply grows, changes, sheds leaves, sprouts new ones. The river does not insist on being a particular shape, it flows. And in the same way, you are not a static self, but a living movement, a dance of consciousness, inseparable from the greater dance of the cosmos. Once you glimpse this truth, even briefly, a great relaxation comes. You realize you do not need to defend the story of who you are, because the story was never the whole truth. You realize that the labels others place on you, whether praise or criticism, do not define your being. They are just sounds passing through the air. And in this realization, you find freedom, not because you have gained something new, but because you have stopped clinging to what was never truly yours. The mind is constantly grasping, holding, clutching at things as though by sheer force it could make them stay. It clings to possessions, to people, to experiences, to ideas, believing that by holding tightly enough it will find safety. And yet the very act of clinging is what creates suffering, for everything in life is in motion. Nothing stands still. Every form you encounter is already dissolving into something else. The body grows, changes, ages, and dies. Relationships evolve, shift, and sometimes end. The seasons turn, the stars burn out, the waves rise and fall. To live as though you can preserve what is by resisting its nature is to fight a battle that cannot be won. This is the trap of fearing to let go, the mind's attempt to freeze the river of existence. We all know this instinct. When we feel joy, we want to hold on to it forever. When we experience love, we want to guarantee it will never leave. When we find comfort, we want to build walls around it so it cannot be disturbed. But joy changes, love evolves, comfort dissolves. The attempt to stop change is like trying to trap air in your hands. The tighter you squeeze, the less you have. Life moves through us like breath, and to cling to any breath is to suffocate. You can only live by inhaling and exhaling, by taking in and letting go. In the same way, peace comes not from holding life still, but from allowing its flow. The fear of letting go arises because the mind equates release with loss. If I let go of this relationship, will I be alone? If I let go of this belief, will I be lost? If I let go of control, will everything fall apart? The mind thinks of letting go as falling into a void, as a kind of death. And in a sense, it is a death. The death of attachment, the death of the false security we cling to. But what dies is not life itself. What dies is the illusion of permanence. What remains is a deeper freedom, a recognition that you were never holding the universe together in the first place. Think about how much pain comes from refusing to let go. A person clings to a past hurt, replaying it over and over, as though by holding the memory tightly they might change it. But the past does not change, it only imprisons them in bitterness. Another clings to possessions, guarding them anxiously, fearing theft or loss, and in doing so they cannot enjoy what they have. Someone else clings to an identity, insisting, I must always be strong, I must always be right, and when life inevitably contradicts that identity, they suffer. In each case, it is the grasping, not the thing itself, that creates pain. Even love, when mixed with clinging, becomes distorted. True love is spacious, allowing the beloved to be free. But when love becomes attachment, it suffocates. I cannot live without you, we say, and in those words we reveal that what we call love is often fear of loss. When the beloved changes, as all people do, fear arises. When they leave, despair arises. The pain is real, but it is amplified by the belief that we could have stopped change by holding on harder. Yet no hand, no matter how strong, can grip the flowing river. The fear of letting go shows up also in our relationship to ideas and beliefs. We grow attached to certain views of the world, to opinions, to dogmas, and when they are challenged, we resist. We cling because these beliefs give us a sense of stability, of knowing. To let them go feels like stepping into uncertainty, but life is uncertain by nature, and no belief, however comforting, can make it otherwise. To hold on to rigid ideas is to close oneself off from the vastness of reality. To let go is to open, to allow new insights to flow in, to live in curiosity rather than fear. There is also the fear of letting go of the self-image. We build an idea of who we are, and then we guard it fiercely. If we see ourselves as successful, we fear failure. If we see ourselves as kind, we fear being exposed as unkind. If we see ourselves as wise, we fear being seen as foolish, and so we spend energy maintaining the mask, defending it, repairing it. But the mask is heavy, and the longer we wear it, the more we forget the face beneath. Letting go of the self-image feels dangerous because we think it is all we have, but in truth, beneath the mask there is a freedom that does not depend on appearances. Why do we fear letting go so much? Because the ego thrives on attachment. The ego is the sense of me that believes it is separate from the flow of life. It survives by grasping. This is mine, this defines me, this will keep me safe. To let go is to weaken the ego's grip, to see through its illusion. And the ego resists this with all its strength. It whispers, if you let go, you will have nothing. If you release, you will disappear. But those who have tasted letting go know that the opposite is true. To release is not to disappear, but to expand, to fall into a spaciousness that was hidden by clinging. Letting go does not mean indifference. It does not mean you stop caring, stop loving, stop acting. It means you engage fully without trying to freeze what cannot be frozen. It means you love without demanding permanence. You act without insisting on results. You live without trying to capture life. Imagine holding a bird in your hand. If you clutch too tightly, you harm it. If you hold too loosely, it flies away. But if you open your hand and let it rest freely, it may choose to stay. Love, peace, even life itself are like that bird. They thrive in freedom, not in captivity. Consider the seasons. Winter does not cling to its snow. Spring does not hold back its blossoms. Summer does not resist the fading into autumn. Each season lets go into the next, and in this letting go, the cycle of life continues. Imagine if winter refused to release its hold, there would be no spring. But we, unlike the seasons, often resist. We cling to youth and fear aging, cling to life and fear death, cling to comfort and fear change. Yet aging is as natural as blossoming, death as natural as birth, change as natural as growth. To fear letting go is to fear life itself, for life is nothing but change. When you truly see the nature of impermanence, a new attitude arises. You begin to cherish without clinging, to enjoy